Hey folks, thanks for watching. I want to make the case in this video that some of the uncertainty that we're seeing in the weather forecast is really the result of two things that are highlighted here on the satellite loop this morning. This is the Western Atlantic on the right side here on the left. We have the Eastern Pacific. The top is the continental US. What we can see here quickly, what kind of catches our eye is one, we've had this active start to the hurricane season in the Eastern Pacific, now up to 3 named storms. 2 of those visible as tropical storms here just this morning, Cosme on the left, and then Barbara to the east of that. Now to the north over Texas, another thing that catches our eye, this large thunderstorm complex and squall line moving through West Texas, now getting into central Texas. This highlights a different fact that we've seen over the last 14 to 30 days, and that's the southern plains, the southern high plains extending over into the mid-south at times have been active, wet, severe reports, however you want to spin it. I mean, this area has been active. And both of these features, if you will, are influencing the development of subtropical ridging. Now, this time of year in June, climatologically, we typically start to see ridging develop over the Four Corners and at times over the southern plains. When this happens, we start to see ridge-riding thunderstorms come across the Midwest, and that typically completes our budget for moisture in much of the Midwest as we get into the end of June into July. Now, if these are variable, they allow moisture into some of these areas at times and prevent drought from building. If it shifts over the east and we see that subtropical ridge leave Texas and Oklahoma, come over the southeast, we actually can see drought build into here quickly in the summer over states like Florida and then other areas in the southeast. So how those are going to set up, what's influencing those as we get into June and then ultimately into July and August, are what we're going to concern ourselves with. That uncertainty with these tropical storms trying to nudge that ridge to the west, and then the resistance because of all the moisture over the southern plains has built in some forks in the road in the forecast. And I think we see those even looking out into early next week. So I'll take you into the forecast at the end of this. I want to talk about Europe briefly a bit. I'll do that at the beginning and end of this video. And then the MJO, Eric talked about this yesterday, that's likely influencing this fast start to the Pacific hurricane season. It's on the move, and that has a role to play both in the end of June forecast, and then if we kind of extrapolate that into July, we get a first kind of hint as to where we're going in July. It's one data point worth looking at that, and that'll be kind of right in the last few slides of this video. If we zoom in a little bit closer on the Eastern Pacific, we can see Cosme to the west here, and then Barbara to the east. Barbara was a hurricane yesterday. It's weakened. As you go north in the East Pacific, the waters cool very quickly, unlike the Gulf of Mexico, comparatively much warmer. So seeing these storms struggle here this morning, that's going to continue to be the case today. Fortunately, these aren't a strong threat for landfall in Mexico or the continental U.S. otherwise. The National Hurricane Center has highlighted an area to the southeast of them for potential additional development. So even out over the next 7 days, this development isn't imminent. We're seeing, again, this kind of wrench in the forecast, if you will, because as these storms develop, there's trying to pull that subtropical ridging more so over the Eastern Pacific. You can actually see this. I'm going to take you back to that first loop. This is the infrared satellite, but if I take you over to the water vapor, I always love looking at these satellite loops. Could just stare at them for hours to start my day. These tropical storms here, all this convection, this exhaust, moves heat into the upper atmospheres, and that starts to nudge and influence the ridge and the jet stream. What we see here in this kind of darker color, if you can see that north of those storms, is that subtropical ridge is certainly not over Texas, Oklahoma, or even really the Four Corners. It's further west. See it kind of anchored south of California. Now it's embedded in broader flow. We actually, if you look at these high clouds, they're streaming up and over the northwest, and there's the ridge that brought the heat wave yesterday to portions of Washington. Some of those heat advisories continuing today. But if you look over the eastern continental U.S., you can see the flow moving out of the northwest and then spinning up into the east over New England. There's our trough. So you can kind of piece everything together here. But again, additional development here, should it occur over the next 7 days, I would think it's going to try to pull some of that ridging that typically forms in this area this time of year, certainly in late June, and keep that more variable, perhaps splitting over this area. And that could have influences in Florida as well. If we just jump over quickly, I'm not going to take this 500 millibar height forecast too far into the forecast because we're going to do that at the end of this video, but I do want to make it valid as about 6 a.m., 7 a.m. Central Time near the recording of this video. And you can see that trough here, again, anchored south of California with those storms to the south. It's allowed weakness to build into Texas. In fact, if I take this forecast into Tuesday evening and now into Wednesday, you can see that little trough here lingering, and this is going to produce rainfall, additional storms here over the southern plains, and that trough, or that ridge, I should say, staying off to the west and split over this area, not allowing it to build in. Another thing resisting that ridging, we talked about this, we're going to see this fill in even more with that storm system moving its way through the south central part of Texas here, but just all the moisture that we've seen looking at the last 14 days of rainfall, this extends to other areas across the southeast as well. We can see this in just the soil moisture values. This is the NASA estimated soil moisture for the root zone. Areas of the southwest that saw some of that moisture with Tropical Storm Alvin, and then again, just across the mid-south section, even into the southeast. If you're going to try to move a ridge over this area, it's going to warm up the temperatures much slower. Water has a higher thermal inertia. It takes more energy to heat up water than it would dry land. And so this is kind of, a get out of heat card that you can play over the next 7 to 10 days. I'll make one point though. The hydrological cycle in this area is quick. So if you do start to build heat in here and those ET rates start going up, you only have about 7 to 10 days of that before that moisture starts getting recycled pretty quickly and either moved elsewhere or falling back again in a similar area. So that's something to be mindful of. This kind of resistance doesn't hold forever. Another way we can view this is kind of neat, looking at the NDVI. We looked at this earlier this year to highlight just how wet areas of the Mid-South were and how dry we were in the northern plains. It's changed a bit here. We filled in some of this area with greener colors. We have a crop emerging out of the ground. We do still see some lingering beige, kind of orange colors in here across the northern plains. Certainly not the western Dakotas, but in the eastern Dakotas. You can see how wet we are over the southern high plains. Again, just showing you how much water is getting in to the ground cover there. While I'm on the kind of NDVI conversation, I did want to jump over to Europe because we're going to talk about it briefly at the end of this video. I've already gone ahead and highlighted eastern Ukraine, parts of the grain belt of Russia. This area has gone over dry quickly in the last few weeks. Started above average in mid-May, but the last 2 weeks getting into mid-June now, we're seeing those NDVI values fall quickly here. I've highlighted them in red. There's that NDVI value that averages in black. But just to see those beige colors here, I'll take you over and show you when those aren't highlighted what those look like. See some of that dryness here. Other areas in Europe dealing with more variable precipitation. Western Ukraine having more rainfall here recently over the last kind of 10 to 15 days, but it's really in the east. Some serious grain producing regions here looking at increasing drought potential. Showed you that storm complex over Texas. Want to get you the reports here. Let's refresh that. Blow that up a little bit bigger, just over West Texas. All the storm reports from that system yesterday. These likely will populate more so, I would think, this morning, again, as people start waking up. Some scattered reports over the southeast and then the eastern Corn Belt. A few severe storms making their way over into the mid-Atlantic as well. We did talk about kind of that severe report pattern, if you will, earlier this year. I kind of made the case that sometimes that just highlights areas where we're seeing water stress. We'll start this over in March. We've done this a few times this year. March, we saw a fast start to the year. Multiple tornadic producing storms here across portions of the Midwest. Then over the southeast, we started to worry a bit as a result of this for the southern plains. We kind of talked about how if the storm chasers start moving west, taking the interstates over into the southern high plains, Oklahoma and Texas, then we'd be less concerned with this area in terms of water, maybe more concerned with large hail and tornado, and that's certainly been the case. And that was what happened. We go into April, and that activity started shifting back west. We continued to see activity over the Mid-South with the flooding events in April, unfortunately. We had a tornado outbreak in May across portions of the Mid-South up into the Midwest, but then plenty of activity back over the plains, central and southern plains, and over the southeast as well. As we started to go into May, we noticed that this area was a little bit dry, and that continued to concern us with what we called kind of maybe the I-80 dryness that we've kept an eye on. As we went into June, this activity tends to predictably move to the north. The severe reports start getting up into Nebraska, the Dakotas, Iowa. But so far in June, haven't quite seen this yet. Still kind of anchored over the southern plains. We saw the derecho event over the southeast just here recently. So this area continues to lack severe reports. That's good in terms of a lack of damage, but if it means a lack of moisture as well, it's something that has to get on our radar, for lack of a better word. That was a great segue. There's the I did not plan that. There is the radar here this morning. And again, that squall line in Texas. Can see that spinning. Otherwise, just a little bit of activity here, lingering showers, maybe some rumbles of thunder across the southeast, and then that frontal system making its way through New England here this morning. Otherwise, pretty light in terms of precipitation. Can see some light showers, likely not even making it to the ground here over the Dakotas. I do want to zoom in on that squall line here. I'm going to reset this tomorrow. Yesterday, I should say. Seeing that squall line develop yesterday evening, and into the overnight and early morning hours here. And this is keeping its act together. It's impressive to see. I'm usually seeing a bit more weakening at this time in the morning. You can see kind of near the end of this loop, this little MCV, this mesoscale convective vortex. There it is. It spins up right there that we often see with these. And this is likely going to linger over North Texas today and potentially be a source or an organization for eventual development later today. And then that would mean, right, more thunderstorm and precipitation over that same area. If we look at the broader jet stream level flow here this morning, again, we can highlight those features that we looked at just at the beginning. There's that subtropical ridge south of California, that broader ridge in the jet stream over the northwest. Saw the heat over the portions of the northwest yesterday. that trough over the east, which has kept temperatures cool in this area here. We are going to see this ridge kind of flatten and lean over into the Midwest here as we go through this week. That's going to warm up our temperatures and also start to bring the possibility of ridge riding thunderstorms back into the conversation. If we just look at the SPC outlook on the top, I'm enjoying this grid here in terms of a forecasting perspective because it highlights on the top here over the next 3 days where we're expecting severe weather development, and then on the bottom we're expecting heavy rainfall. And so with that ridge starting to flatten out and lean over the top of the Midwest, we can see the Storm Prediction Center day 1. Not much activity here, maybe western Montana over portions of southern Oregon, but as we go into day 2, now eastern Montana included, and we have this little area of potential thunderstorm development across Iowa, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin tomorrow. Some of this area needs this rainfall, flirting with drought classifications here in mid-June. And then additional potential development here over the central and northern plains as we go into the day. This would be Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday here. If we look at the excessive rainfall on the bottom part of this grid, with that spinning trough over Texas, the MCV that I talked about, additional rainfall likely here today, tomorrow on Wednesday, and then today, Thursday. You can see that area they're highlighting over the upper Midwest as well on Thursday. If we look at this from a 3-kilometer NAM, just kind of a different perspective, the forecasted radar here, I'll make this valid as about 6. Let's do 7 a.m. this morning, Central Time. You can see it's not perfectly capturing where that squall line actually is because we just looked this morning and it's all the way down here. In fact, it does a decent job developing it here after. Into the forecast, there's that squall line. The problem here, it's late. This 3-kilometer NAM forecast is now 11 a.m. in the forecast, and this is actually happening right now. So got half right. For other forecasting, it's hard for us. It's hard for the models at times. So while it got the shape of the storm correct, it was off by about 4 or 5 hours. So the rest of this forecast in Texas here is going to be a little bit off as a result of that. And that's just the challenge of some of these. We call them CAMs, convection allowing models. They're not perfect, but the story is that we're seeing more precipitation across South Texas today, potentially North Texas overnight tonight near that MCV. If I take you back further, waiting on that activity over the Northwest, can see those severe storms potentially over portions of Oregon today. This is 9 p.m. tonight. Additional activity over portions of Montana. Waiting into tomorrow, Wednesday. I'll take this into Wednesday evening. There's that strip of potential precipitation, showers and thunderstorms over southern Minnesota, potentially northern Iowa. This is Wednesday morning. Let's do lunchtime Wednesday, and then there. So 5, 6 p.m. Wednesday evening, all the way over toward the Chicago metro area. Seeing even in the eastern Dakotas here, potential storm development on Wednesday afternoon. We continue to see continued activity across portions of Texas and the Gulf Coast states, Montana, potentially looking at some showers and thunderstorms as well tomorrow. Take this forecast into early Thursday, now 5 a.m. lunchtime, and now 1 p.m. Thursday. You can see additional activity moving up here through the eastern Dakotas. We'll have to watch to see if we'll get additional activity here later in the day, Iowa, southern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, northern Illinois, and then additional precipitation over the Mid-South. Again, kind of doubling back and looking on that Thursday forecast. Can see rainfall potential here over the Mid-South and then over here across portions of the upper Midwest. I do want to jump over and look at the ECMWF forecast. This is looking at the 500 millibar vorticity plot. Again, as these ridge riding thunderstorms set up, they can be these little kind of squiggles or features in the jet stream. And these show up on these 500 millibar vorticity plots. So I'm going to take this forecast into this evening. There's that weak trough over Texas with renewed development expected there today. This broad ridge that's starting to flatten out. Notice it's not one of these kind of big amplified ridges over the Northwest anymore. We've just taken it into this evening, and it's that broader kind of northwest flow. And you'll notice there's today, this is Tuesday, there's nothing really in here to focus development. But as I take this forecast into Wednesday, 7 a.m., now 1 p.m., just see that little feature moving across the Dakotas. There's that potential development. Tomorrow on Wednesday, we have another one coming in behind it, Idaho. Now into Thursday, 7 a.m., 1 p.m. Thursday, now 7 p.m. Thursday. Again, a few of these features on Thursday moving through. Better potential for thunderstorms development along that in the afternoon and then into the overnight hours. And there's that lingering trough over Oklahoma, Texas. That's why we saw that excessive rainfall potential over portions of the Mid-South on Thursday. I'm going to take this forecast further out. We see this trough continuing to spin here, likely seeing increased precipitation chances. Again, this is Saturday. This ridge now trying to firm up more so over the central U.S. We talked about how this area is going to resist that a little bit. You see the ridge now trying to push in to portions of northwest Mexico, over New Mexico, and West Texas. But as it does that, you notice again, look at that little weakness here in the ridge. The ridge kind of pulling back toward the southwest here. This is Sunday. And waiting for some ridge riding thunderstorms over the top. Now seeing those here on Monday, this is 1 a.m. Again, little blips in the jet stream here around that ridge. We see a deeper trough now over the western U.S. on Tuesday, and this sets us up for much more activity as that ridge is now flattening out. Again, didn't take hold here over Texas. It's now kind of splitting. There's this piece here over the eastern Pacific, this piece here over the southeast. This has allowed troughing to build in between, and we see much more robust potential for precipitation and storm chances next week. This is the 17th. Let's take this forecast into the 18th. We'll take it all the way out at this point. With that troughing over the west, again, just multiple chances for thunderstorm development now into Thursday the 19th. We do see that ridge trying to return back over this area here. You can see it kind of split over the southeast and southwest. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happens, again, because of that resistance over the southern plains. If we just look at the ECMWF precipitation forecast here, I'll take this into Tuesday afternoon. Right, that activity over Texas, waiting on activity here in the northern plains until tomorrow on Wednesday. In the Midwest, we see that there. Now Wednesday evening over Iowa, southern Minnesota, areas like Montana and Wyoming. Overnight, late Thursday, or I should say late Wednesday into very early Thursday. Continuing across, again, I-80 and a little bit north. That's Thursday afternoon. Thursday evening, remember that short wave's right about here, so expecting more robust development there. We also saw that area across the Mid-South highlighted on Thursday. And then now late Thursday, this is really into Friday morning at this point, seeing much better rainfall coverage here across Wisconsin and Minnesota. So take this into Saturday. Remember that weakness in the flow. Better precipitation chances now across portions of the Midwest and the Mid-South as we go through the day Saturday. Lingering into Sunday. Shower activity potential picking back up in the northern plains. On Monday afternoon, that's when that trough was setting up here now over the northwest. We were trying to get that ridge building in over the southern plains, but it was resisting that a bit. And then now Tuesday, better precipitation chances over a wide area here. That continues on Wednesday, more of the same on Thursday. Just additional chances for storm developments across much of this part of the country, really kind of this whole quadrant here. As a result of that trough setting up out west, the weakness in that ridge allowing some of these pieces of the flow to get through here. If we look at this all kind of summed up from the ECMWF, the precipitation anomalies, I'll take this out to 7 days. This gets us out into early next week. See some of that activity here highlighted across portions of the upper Midwest. So precip coming to the Canadian Prairie. The south remains very active, but if I take this into a 4 to 10 day, so excluding portions of this week, again, there's that really kind of the activity setting up. Now, I am drawing kind of a wedge here. We've seen this show up a few times in the forecast that there might be some areas in here, kind of at that apex, that do miss out. I wouldn't call that a firm signal right now, but it is something we'll keep an eye on as these storm system setups, as they roll over that ridge and then they sneak underneath it. There might be some areas in between that miss out, but right now the chances are pretty good. This whole area, the eastern continental half of the U.S., for looking at precip next week with how this forecast is shaping up. There again is that little wedge in the 10-day forecast through portions of northern Missouri and western Illinois. The differences in the ECMWF and GFS next week have remained. So I mentioned that kind of fork in the road part of the forecast. I'm going to take this forecast quickly. I'm not going to rehash everything we just talked about, but I do want to take it into early next week. Let's do Sunday. The forecast looks pretty similar at this point. You can see some light activity over the plains, the more organized activity over the Midwest. So take it into next week. The GFS is on the left, and it has been quicker. Monday, it launches a more organized low pressure system through the northern plains. The ECMWF is much slower, organizes slower, and increases precipitation as a result of that later in the week, maybe middle to late part of the week next week. The GFS has just been too quick with these systems coming over the top, in my opinion. It races them through quicker. There's less rainfall that gets out of them just as a result of residence time. So you can see the GFS again on Tuesday. ECMWF just now getting an organized system set up over the northern plains, whereas the GFS has brought another low pressure system through very quickly. It is raining on this area. They're just moving through a little bit quicker. And then now late Tuesday, that system's all the way over here. ECMWF keeping it a little bit further back. Again, GFS has precipitation moving through the middle part of the country. But by middle of the week, this is now Wednesday, ECMWF with a much more broad precipitation shield over that area that we drew earlier. The GFS a lot more spotty because a lot of that energy just moved quickly out of the continental U.S. This is now Thursday, seeing additional plains and prairie precip here from the ECMWF, additional Midwest development. GFS is dry over that area because that activity moved out so quickly. Again, leaning toward the ECMWF here, have just not been, let's say this politely, not been thrilled with the GFS's performance in that kind of 5 to 10 day forecast range. If we do look at the 10-day precipitation anomalies here, again, it's raining in these areas. They're just moving through quickly. So you can see almost these like streaks in the forecast. Without that residence time of the system slowly spinning up, it decreases the precipitation coverage. And so the GFS solution would result in more of these holes that we'd have to keep an eye on as we get into late June near the solstice. I did want to take this. This is the ECMWF ensemble forecast, so similar with what we just went through with the ECMWF, but it's looking at 5-day precipitation anomalies, so a rolling window. I should say 7 days, I believe. Let me double check that. Yeah, looking at 7-day rolling windows. I'm showing this all the way out over the Atlantic, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to take this forecast all the way near the end here. This is actually taking us out closer to late June. And the reason I'm doing that is because as I showed you this forecast here from the ECMWF, where was that? Let's do that 4 to 10 day forecast. We saw good coverage here, and I mentioned that wedge, but we also saw this developing here, some more ridging over the southeast. So I've mentioned with the ridging being resisted here in the southern plains, it's liable to try to split that subtropical ridge. We've seen that at times here with that ridge now over the eastern Pacific, and a potential another piece to that over areas of the tropical Atlantic here, including parts of Florida. And I just noticed that try to forecast the Atlantic hurricane potential over the next kind of 7 to 14 days. We didn't see much here. You don't see any sort of precipitation anomalies that would highlight that. But while I was doing that, I noticed we're really starting to build in some precipitation deficits here now over a 7-day window. This is looking out June 17th through the 25th, so well out into the forecast now over portions of the southeast. Now, the good news here is if you're looking at the northern plains, the prairie, or the Midwest, that increases the precipitation chances here from the ECMWF ensemble, but the southeast potentially going back over dry. Eric talked about this area here has that tendency to do this time of year despite how wet they were. The AIFS is a different solution than the GFS, the ECMWF, or the ECMWF ensemble. I'm going to show it here. I'm starting this as of Tuesday morning. Just double check that timestamp here. I'm going to take this forecast quickly. Similar here with that lingering trough over Texas, that subtropical ridge over the eastern Pacific. This is now Thursday. So we go into Sunday, June 15th, and now Monday. We see it trying again to anchor over the southern plains, but it's struggling. Did you notice that as I took that forward? So that ridge here almost looks like, boy, here it comes, that big central U.S. ridge. But then as we go into Monday and Tuesday, look at how quickly that weakness pops back up into the central plains. This is Tuesday, June 17th. Additional rainfall expected next week. That subtropical ridge now splitting over Florida and East Pacific. We just talked about that potential. Now Wednesday, that system moving through. We see this ridge trying to anchor back over the central U.S. And so this is the fork in the road at this point in the forecast. Thursday, now Friday. The AIFS really anchors this ridge back over portions of West Kansas, North Texas, New Mexico. Not necessarily a Four Corners ridge, but almost more of a proper central plains ridge. It's kind of on an island right now. The other models have more weakness in this area. They're trying to split that ridge over portions of the eastern Pacific. Or Florida, we just looked at the ECMWF ensemble, went drier here, unlike the AIFS. So it's kind of on an island right now, but it's worth keeping an eye on because this model has done pretty well in this longer range this year. So this is not a solution I can dismiss. There is some of this chance that this ridging builds in at the end of June. This takes us all the way out to June 21st now. Comparatively, the ECMWF ensemble on that same date, Saturday, June 21st, that ridge is a lot flatter. It's almost more anchored over the southeast and has this little bit of a split, again, over the eastern Pacific, troughing over the northwest, and this would bring ridge riding flow right over this area, likely bringing some precipitation and relief to some of the warm temperatures that would be expected in a pattern like this. This would be a lot more of a moderate pattern than what we saw from the AIFS. As a result, if we look at the ECMWF ensemble, the precipitation departures, we actually looked at a very similar map to this earlier, just a different site. And you see that dryness over portions of the southeast. That flatter ridge over the top, more ridge-riding thunderstorms through the middle part of the country, the central plains, the prairie, over into the Midwest. I have to watch this area for going back over dry as we go through late June, but it would be less anomalous in terms of that ridging and the heat over the middle part of the country than the AIFS would. If we jump over and look at that same forecast again from that AIFS model, this is the 8 to 14 day outlook, the 18th through the 24th. Have some of that weak flow getting through the southern plains here and into the southeast. Do see one system here through the Midwest, but this is a much drier forecast. Be a hotter forecast for this area too as we get into late June. With that ridge it had developing over this area, we'd be the ridge riding thunderstorms would be up here. It wouldn't be through here under a forecast scenario like that. Which one is more likely at this point? It's complicated, right? This area we've seen over the next kind of 5 to 7 days resisting that ridging here. I'm going to lean at this point toward this more split look that we're seeing from the ECMWF ensemble with ridging here and allowing those thunderstorms to come over the top. This is a common time of year. We're seeing that next week, and the atmosphere has a way of just kind of persisting and what that near-term forecast does. We often mention that as a bias, but there's a reason it's a bias because it often works out that way. But I don't want to dismiss the AIFS outright right now just because it has performed well this year at times. Look to the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. Again, showing more of that split look to it with less of that heat anchored over the central portion of the country. This is the 17th through the 23rd, so a little bit earlier. We'll have to see where their forecast updates today. As a result, that precipitation looks better over the middle and northern part of the country with some of that dryness building in with that split ridging. I do want to show this quickly. This is just the temperatures over the next few days. The heat will be less today in the northwest in terms of the magnitude versus yesterday on Monday. The heat advisory is lingering there today. Also seeing some red flag warnings, concerns for some wildfires there. If you take this forecast into Wednesday, that heat finally migrating off into the much more of the central Corn Belt area. This is an area that needs GDDs with some of the cold weather that we've seen in May and early June. So getting up toward 90 degrees Fahrenheit finally. Feels kind of silly to be looking for 90 degree Fahrenheit temperatures in June. We typically do that pretty easily. And seeing those high 80s lingering in some of these areas on Thursday. Friday, seeing a bit colder and moderation of those temperatures across the eastern part of the country. I'm taking this out Sunday, now Monday. But even Monday, this is a great example of where we started this video. That ridge is really trying to push in here now on all the forecasts. Let's just go back. We'll do the ECMWF ensemble. I mean, even by, let's take this forecast into Monday, June 16th, right? There's that ridge trying to move over the central plains, right? We were kind of seeing if that was going to anchor there. But look, we're not even getting up into the high 90s in this area here, despite that ridging right over the top. Just shows you how that moisture in the ground resists that heating up there. Again, show you this is from just the ECMWF proper here. We'll take this into Monday. And that ridge is right over the top, and we're almost not even seeing anomalously warm temperatures over that area. I do want to mention the MJO conversation as I kind of wrap this up here today, just checking my time. The reason we've seen all that activity in the Eastern Pacific, that fast start to the season, boy, you can see that MJO right over this area, that's kind of influencing for more ascent, more activity, more bubbling thunderstorms right over the Eastern Pacific, consistent with what we've seen in this area. And as I take this forecast in the future, Eric showed this yesterday, how quickly it snaps back over Indonesia, either the Eastern Indian Ocean, the far Western Pacific phases 4, 5, maybe 6 here. Over this portion of the country, we looked at some of those phases in terms of climatology yesterday and just kind of noticed if we take these into mid to late June, look at phase 4, phase 5, even phase 6, we don't see a strong ridge pattern over North America. We can see some weakness in the flow consistent with the forecast. Maybe getting out into phase 6 in late June, some ridging over Canada, but no obvious ridging in these sorts of phases, even taking out a little bit forward into late June. Just don't see, if we stay over in phase 4, 5, and 6, strong ridge development, at least looking at climatology. Now, if I take this forecast further into the future, this is now getting out into July, outside the window of confidence here. But we do see that activity try to shift over East Africa and the Western Indian Ocean. I've mentioned this at times. The ECMWF extended forecast will not shake this look to it. And this concerns me as just as one data point, because if we do kind of jump over, this would be phase 1, 2, maybe 3 over in the Indian Ocean of the MJO. If I jump over into late July, or let's do maybe mid-July, here's phase 1. Now we see a better ridge signal from that climatology, parked over the Midwest. That would be more concerning kind of in those pollination periods and as we enter grain fill. If I look at phase 2, ridging over Lake Michigan, that would be a concern. Again, this is the middle to late part of July. And then phase 3, see that off the east. Now, if we get this trough in here, this would be a nice break with some rainfall over the northern plains and maybe the upper Midwest. But again, nitpicking at this point, what I want to avoid is the scenario that we're seeing from the ECMWF extended. These long-range forecasts this is what, a 35, 40-day forecast? These are never terribly accurate, so this is not me saying this is going to happen. I just wish it wasn't one of the few data points that we had here at this range. It is something to keep an eye on. If we look over in the ECMWF seasonal forecast that came out here recently, their forecast for June, this is precipitation anomalies. We see activity here over Central America, the Eastern Pacific. That's consistent with what we've seen already in June with that active start, but with that MJO expected to snap back over Indonesia, all right, we're seeing that increased precipitation there. That makes sense looking at the kind of tropical precipitation pattern here. Also seeing, look, there's that dryness over in Eastern Europe that we talked about earlier. If we go back into July in the forecast, take this 1 month further, you'll notice kind of mixed in this area here, certainly dry. We've flipped over dry now over portions of the Eastern Pacific, Western Atlantic, and unfortunately seeing some precipitation pick up over here in the West Indian Ocean and East Africa. I'm going to take that forecast back to June and July. And you can also see this highlighted in the pressure field, so the monthly sea level pressure anomalies. In June, some weakness here, some weakness here. Other blue colors here and highlighting likely increased precipitation. Higher pressure here in the West Indian Ocean. This is again June, but if I take into July, unfortunately, low pressure anomalies showing up here now, indicative of increased precipitation. Now higher pressure anomalies here, indicative of less precipitation. So it's that kind of signal, even from the seasonal model here, that's concerning. And if I jump over and show monthly precip, again, the seasonal hanging on to some of those dry concerns here over portions of the Central Plains, the Northern Plains, and the Upper Midwest. Also highlighting just Europe here, Eastern Europe, looking dry as well out in July. If I take this forecast into August, you can see some of that lingering here over both these growing regions. Again, one data point here. We'll continue to watch to see how it unfolds. Eric will talk with you all tomorrow. Thanks for making it to the end of the video here today, and I'll see you all Thursday.